Today is Monday, the 24th of July, and I'm Paul Glumaz with the Political Action Committee of Lyndon LaRouche, and we are being brought to you by General Welfare Presents. We are at a point right now where it's becoming evident that any idea of doing anything economically in the United States is not under the current situation possible. The infrastructure projects that Trump has been talking about are not possible. Everything is going to bail out the banks. Everything. We have an infrastructure crisis in New York, which is going to intensify after September. And you have a blame game going on between the governor and the mayor over who's to blame for it. But the money ain't there to do the required development that's required to finally deal with some of the major infrastructure problems that are hitting New York, which cannot be called off. And there's aspects of that all over the country. Meanwhile, the population is wondering, well, when is things going to kick in? Where I can get a job, or our manufacturing can grow, or all of these things. But none of that is really possible. The Federal Reserve isn't going to let you do it. Janet Yellen of the Federal Reserve says we're not going to have another crisis. When the Federal Reserve Chairman Janet Yellen says we're not going to have another crisis like 2007 or 2008. That's Federal Reserve speak with saying yes, we're about to have another crisis like 2007, 2008. Because why would they want to say they're not going to have another crisis if they weren't going to have another crisis? They wouldn't say that. They wouldn't say anything. But if she's saying we escaped it, we're not going to have it, that means we're going to have it. Otherwise, she wouldn't say it. And this is the situation with Italy. The Italian banking system is no longer is bankrupt, and the amount of funds required to recapitalize the banking system is beyond the means of the Italian people to squeeze out of the Italian people. So a lot of people are taking it in the shorts. There's a kind of very complicated bailing going on, and the experts are saying that the only way Italy can deal with the crisis is to leave the euro, go back to their own currency, and implement Glass-Steagall type measures of separating dealing with the banks by reorganizing and finding out what the bad debt is and what the good stuff is, and keeping the depositors insured and so on and so forth. But they can't do that under the European Union. They can't do that under in the current situation. So you have these situations developing. The population of the United States isn't falling for all the crap in the media about Trump and about Russia. Finally today, the Democrats had to, pony up. They had a lineup of Democrats: Schumer, Pelosi, Elizabeth Warren. And they're going to now, they're going to help America, right? And so they had a number of things that they were promoting, some of which were already in the Trump playbook, like a apprentice program and tax credits for businesses that employ people in manufacturing and training them and so forth and so on. But they, nonetheless, they didn't go to where they had to go. They didn't discuss Glass-Steagall. They didn't discuss how they were going to come up with the money for all of this. But you're not going to have the money. The money isn't there. It's all going to bail out the banks. So what happened is that, I believe it was the first question or so, Anita Gallagher of our movement got up and asked about Glass-Steagall. Well, Elizabeth Warren got all excited about it. Yeah, that's what I'm for, blah, blah, blah. And then Schumer said, well, we got to talk about it. We got to discuss that. So it's very clear that they're not serious about dealing with the problem. And so you have this situation where you're going to have to do the four laws, or what LaRouche's four laws is, they're going to have to be implemented. And there's a fundamental problem, because these people don't understand why you have to implement the four laws. The Glass-Steagall being the first, creating the credit system, and then funneling the credit into infrastructure and key projects that develop the productive power of the nation, and then a crash program for fusion in space. They don't understand why. And they don't understand the nature of the physical economy, the nature of the economy's relationship to science, to the development of the cognitive powers of the population, the relationship of the optimism of development has on the population. They don't have any sense of any of this. Okay? They're in the dark. And so on understanding the deeper aspects of it. So what I'm going to go through now is the deeper aspects of why all roads lead to the four laws of Lyndon, economic laws of Lyndon LaRouche. And now, first and foremost, the four laws represent a battle over the self-identity of the human race, of the people of our nation. What is their self-identity? Are they slaves to Wall Street? Are they going to allow, or are they just, are we a nation, or are we just basically a looting ground for the criminal financial system? So it's a question of your identity. Are you an American, or are you just a peon in the financial system, where you're losing your wages, you're losing ground, you're losing your morale, you're being addicted to opiates and alcohol, and so forth and so on. So on the deepest level, the issue of the LaRouche's four laws is both philosophical and theological involved. And the reason it's philosophical and theological I'll get into, but it has to do with the discoveries of science and physical economics that LaRouche made in the early 50s. Now, so I'll start with the theological and philosophical issues. So first I'll start with the theological and philosophical issues. Now, up until the late 1700s, there was no such thing as science separated from philosophy or from theology. It was believed, regardless of your position on any of the areas or issues of being discussed, that these areas were not divorced. If the universe has a creator, and it is true, there must be a coherent expression in the physical world that can be understood by human beings, because human beings have that capacity. In other words, the Creator did not create a chaotic, ununderstandable universe. Why would Why would you have a Creator if he just had chaos? I mean, it doesn't make any sense. So a science which is not asked these theological questions, well, how would the Creator have done it? It is a science devoid of theology. And unless you want to prove through science that there is no God, essentially you're divorced from theology. You say, well, those questions have nothing to do with science. Well, you can't experimentally demonstrate the Creator created the universe. Okay? But you have to ask yourself, if there is a Creator, how would the Creator have arranged it in such a way that it's based on a least action principle, it's efficient, and there's a physical causality in the system, and and an example of this with Kepler. And what Kepler did is, he asked, how would God have organized the solar system? And the three models that were being presented at that time, Tycho Brahe, Copernicus, and Ptolemy, were all centered on an idea that the center of the solar system, whether it was near the Earth or near the Sun, were did not fall on the physical center of the Earth or the physical center of the Sun. It fell upon a point, an imaginary point in space. And Kepler said that God would not set up a solar system whose center is an imaginary point. Okay, because how would all the bodies that are revolving around that imaginary point know where the imaginary point would be? And so it's from the standpoint of saying that no, the sun has to be the center of the solar system, and the planets revolve around the sun, and they're revolving around the sun. You have to discover the laws that govern those planets revolving around the sun, and that's the beginning of one of the most profound breakthroughs in science. But it didn't come because of observational data. It came because the human imagination had to imagine how it must be, if indeed, how it must be from a rational standpoint. And the same with Einstein. Einstein was operating on the same basis. He was trying to imagine how the speed of light would work. He was imagining being traveling at the speed of light. He was imagining what the world would look like if the speed of light were not constant, and he was imagining what the world would look like if the speed of light was constant. And he came to the conclusion that the speed of light had to be constant everywhere, no matter what the velocities that were going on. The speed of light is always constant no matter whether your planet is moving this way or moving that way or moving any which way in regard to any other. It had to be constant because light is the basis of communication, and the order of events would be chaotic, right? If the speed of light was not constant, if the speed of light varied with the speeds of other non-light entities, and and from there he develops special relativity. But he did so because he had a conception that the universe had to make sense, and that the universe could not be arbitrary, could not be. It has to be a reasonable. It has to be based on reason, and whether you believe in God or not, the point that's not the point. The point is that there's a coherence. Now, so whether you believe that human beings were born similarly, okay, in philosophy, especially the philosophy of how human beings know what they know, you always have had this split. Whether you believe that human beings were born with a blank slate and through the senses you acquire knowledge, or whether you believe that human beings have pre-existing concepts that are then applied to experience. Generally, in both cases, you have a sense that reason, the power of human beings to understand the world and act on the world, exists. Now, between these two traditions, the empiricist, which is generally connected to Aristotle, and the nativist, generally connected to Plato, along came Immanuel Kant in the late 1700s. And he is the most important philosopher, not only at the end of the 1700s, but he shaped the future of philosophy from then on. And Immanuel Kant developed a philosophical concept, series of philosophical concepts that Lyndon LaRouche struggled with for most of his life, trying to deal with the problems that he created. Kant said, yes, you are born with pre-existing concepts. However, these concepts depend on experience, and they cannot exist without the influence of experience. And the senses depend on these concepts. The senses cannot be you cannot order the senses. The senses have to be ordered by these concepts. So the concepts order the sensual experience, but the concepts themselves cannot be have to be triggered by sensual experience. Then he did, in his critique of pure reason, is assert from that standpoint that the mind can only know what it knows based on pre-existing concepts activated by what by sense experience, and that's the world that people know, and they don't. And there's the world that, if there's anything outside of that, they can't know it. If it's not a pre-existing concept in your mind, and if it's not experience, categories. He had 10 categories. Then you have no way of knowing. And he called that which you can know phenomena. And he called reality, which you can't know, noumena. And thus the real world cannot really be known. Thus, and what this does is you have these things that you can't really know. What can't you know? You can't know God exists. Right? That's not part of that structure. So that's something you believe. Right? But you can't know that God exists. There's no way for you to know that God exists, because you're trapped in this sense, in these senses. So basically, through him, religion and theology, or especially theology, is off the hook, because it is no longer subject to science. Right? You can't know. But on the other hand, science is no longer accountable to philosophy and theology either. So you're left with just an experimental, observational science, but you can't make metaphysical or philosophical statements about the universe as a critique of the observational science, because that's not scientific. You can't do what Einstein did or what Kepler did, because that's not scientific. So, following Kant, this led to the further compartmentalization of the material world of science and the humanities. So you ended up having the humanities being totally divorced from the natural sciences. So you have the natural sciences and you have the humanities. There's no relationship to discoveries made in classical music, for instance, by Beethoven or Brahms with science. There's no connection there. And later, this led to the extremes of the current postmodernist current, which includes the likes of Nietzsche and the earlier fascism of the 20th century and the current fascism of the more postmodernists we are dealing with today. So why am I bringing this up? Because until LaRouche came along, this Kantian originated strain of philosophy has dominated modern thought and divorced the philosophical world and the scientific world from the earlier traditions that existed, like those of Leibniz, or the earlier traditions of the Renaissance, like Kepler. What LaRouche essentially discovered, with the help of Riemann, a German scientist, and Cantor, is that the universe is organized by principles that are knowable, and that the discoveries, like the ones Kepler and Einstein made, when applied to economics and culture, change the nature of the universe, change the nature of man's activity, change the nature of the economy, changes the nature of the earth. Therefore, mankind can know what Kant calls the unknowable, noumena, through discoveries. And when those discoveries applied in the physical world change the physical world, then you are discovering how the world really is outside your categories and your experience. And you demonstrate that you know it by the change in the physical world, by the increase in the relative potential population density on the planet, which is a change in the physical relationship of man to the world. Right? That's how you know you know. That's how, but you didn't know that. That did not, that scientific knowledge did not come from your senses or from the categories you brought to your senses. It came through the imagination and the ability to hypothesize what you cannot know, and then make the discovery. Therefore, mankind can know reality as it really is, but not all of reality as it really is, but the part of reality that you need to know to further economically develop, to further develop your mastery of the universe. So this is the key aspect of what human beings really are. This is what it means to be, in the theological sense, created in the image of the Creator. Because the Creator, who created the universe, and man is a creator who's discovering the way the universe was created and is using those discoveries to expand, continue the creation. Now, the European oligarchy, which has promoted the post-Kantian philosophical revolutions of Hegel, Marx, Nietzsche, Heidegger, and the modern postmodernists of Derrida, Foucault, and people like Rorty, want most of all to justify their arbitrary power. They want to escape being accountable to any lawfulness. And most of all, they want to assert that humans have no basis for knowing truth or reason. Now, in traditional religions and cultures that are based upon a monotheistic orientation, like Judaism, Islam, and Christianity, or a philosophical tradition, similarly in China, of Confucianism, you have these conceptions. And however, when the British East India Company was taking over the creating the British Empire, they commissioned a historian by the name of Gibbon to do an exhaustive study of the rise and fall of the Roman Empire. And his conclusion was that what brought Rome down was that it was being challenged by Christianity. It was being challenged by the concept of man in God's image, by the concept of a unitary creator, and that humans can reason, and this is the basis for morality. And the Romans didn't like that. And his thesis is that that's what brought down the Roman Empire. So if you want to build a modern empire, you have to be able to destroy or prevent Christianity from doing that to it. Now, so in Judaism and Confucianism, you have similar concepts. But this is not to say that traditional societies based in part on these four examples do not have issues of corruption and fixed order and oligarchy and all of that. But these traditional societies and their religions have this kernel of a conception of man in their religion and in their philosophy. Now that conception has taken a profound beating in the last 200 years, because because this conception of what is being human, because of the divorce from science, was mainly your ideas in theology, religion, and philosophy were reduced to belief. So this is one of the reasons you have so many charismatic end times religions, because it's about my belief. It's about my relationship to Jesus. It's about my personal beliefs. It is, and they are true because I say they're true because I say that I believe. But that's not, so that's not science, right? That's not science. But science is not about that, you know. So that's why you have this disconnect between science and religion. But LaRouche's concept of physical economics as proof of man being created in the image of the Creator, as being expressed in scientific and technological progress, has begun to spark a revival within formerly traditional cultures and religions, not a fear of progress, as normally would be a fear of science, a fear of progress, but beginning to embrace progress, not as an evil, but as the essence of the affirmation of man's true nature and identity. You see this in China, where we have an idea of Chinese civilizational renaissance based on reason now taking place in China. Confucianism is coming back, but with a scientific and technological component as the basis. We see it in Russia, where the Russian Orthodox Church has embraced scientific and technological progress with Orthodox characteristics as a sacred and glorious gift of God to humanity. When I say all roads lead to four laws as the final practical expression of man's true nature at the level of society and economy, this is what I'm talking about. And you implement the four laws, and you transform the identity of the population, because you're demonstrating that humanity can alter the future, can alter can alter and change the nature of the solar system and the galaxy later on, and so forth. So that's the battle we are in. And I don't have time to go into all of the particulars of tonight that are going on right now, but I think this is important to understand that the four laws of Lind and LaRouche are not just four laws to be adopted. They have a much deeper basis in the resolution of this idea of an unknowable reality that Kant had us suffer for 250 years with, or 200, yeah.